Hey, how's it? Today we are going to mount this, one of my favorite scopes, to my AR. This is the Hawk Sightwinder. Now you might ask yourself, why another video on how to mount a scope? Because there are literally thousands of videos available specifying how to mount your scope, how to set your scope, etc. The problem that I personally face is that I've watched many of these videos go to the shooting range, and after I shoot the first shot, I sort of go, where the fuck did that even go? Did anybody see where that went? And nowadays, if I look at the cost of rounds, so 223, 303, 6.5 Creedmoor rounds, you're looking at 50 Rand a shot, you're looking at 70 Rand a shot. It's like $2 or $3 a round of ammunition. What you want to do is you want to use as little ammunition as possible to get your rifle sighted in. Obviously, even if we go through this entire exercise that I'm going to go through today, the ammunition that you use will still have an impact on the precision or where on the target you're going to have to adjust your scope. So that's quite important to understand. The thing that we want to do though is we want to eliminate variables. We want to make sure that when we ask ourselves questions, or when I pull that trigger, or when I squeeze that trigger, to be more politically correct, when I squeeze that trigger, I want to know that it's either myself or the ammunition or maybe the wind that has an impact on where that bullet interjects with the paper or with the target for that matter. I don't want to think about the fact that maybe my scope isn't level. Maybe it's not perfectly straight. Now, at short ranges, you know, sort of 75, 100 meters, 150 meters, leveling your scope isn't that important. I mean, obviously it plays a role, but you can still get away with minor adjustments, etc. But if you go for long range shooting or anything longer than that, every millimeter counts. So that's what we want to try and focus on today. Now there's a couple of things just to accelerate the process. Is I've gone and put my scope rings on my Picatinny rail. It's not torqued yet, and I'll explain why in just a second. And I've just loosely gone and connected the top of the scope rings as well. Now the first thing that needs to happen is, once we've put our scope rings on the rail, we need to make sure that we've got the perfect sight picture. So I'm just going to adjust this a little bit for where I like it. And yeah, I can see that I need to move this a little bit back. So I'm going to pull it a little bit back, and there I can see that I've now got the perfect sight picture. What I don't want is any black spots or any black dots. Obviously, we can make some adjustments after the scope is mounted, but we want to make sure we've got the best sight picture possible before we go and torque down our scope rings. So now I know that that's perfectly fine, and what I'm going to do is torque down my scope rings. All Hawk settings, so scope accessories and settings are set to 16 pounds, so that's what I set my wrench at, and I'm just going to go and tighten these bolts. Okay. Okay, I can hear that that is now tightened. Okay, perfect. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to use our levels to determine that the rifle is perfectly level. So I'm going to take one of my levels and I'm going to put it at the back here, and I'm just going to adjust the rifle to ensure that it is level. Almost. That is spot on. Now I really like the Wheeler levels for the simple reason that I can now go and attach this level to my barrel to ensure that my barrel is absolutely level with the rest of my rifle. So I'm just going to go and tighten this. Obviously what you want to do is you want to get this as level as possible, but if it's not perfectly straight, we have the ability to do micro adjustments on top here. So just to make sure that this is straight. Make some micro adjustments. I can see it's perfectly straight at the back, perfectly straight at the front. So there we have it. Now, what typically happens next is we will take this level and put it on one of our turrets to make sure that our scope is level. So we would adjust this and move this until our scope is level. The problem is that we assume that the turret cap is straight and that the turret cap is level. Many of the scope manufacturers actually tell you to remove the turret cap and put your level on the base of that specific turret. So we want to make sure that we're not dependent on any of those things. I want to make sure my rifle is level, so I'm just going to go and adjust this again. You can see that's perfectly straight. I can see it straight at the back. And that's where this baby comes in. So this is the Boresight Pro. What this allows me to do is to take this device and connect it to the front of my scope. Now there's different accessories that we've got available. This one's specifically for Picatinny rail, but we also have the ability to just mount this directly onto the barrel of your rifle. So I'm just going to make sure that this is perfectly straight. I can see it's still straight at the back there. I just want to straighten it out at the front. And it's got a grid at the back. So if I switch on the light, that will project my crosshairs to the back of this grid. Now I'm just going to remove this level for a second, and I'm just going to adjust this so that I've got a clear picture. And there we go. So now I can see the crosshairs of the scope in relation to the grid at the back. I'm just going to open up my GoPro here so that you can see what I'm referring to. So I'll post this next to the grid so that you can see what we're looking at there. But there you can see we've got the crosshairs that are now projected onto that grid. And what we need to do is we now need to make sure we need to move the scope so that the crosshairs are perfectly level. And that's exactly what we've just done. So now we know that the rifle is perfectly level. We can see that the crosshairs are perfectly level, which now means that this is perfectly straight. So what we want to do next is we want to start torquing down the screws. So I'm just going to lightly and gently go and tighten these screws. Some of the things that's important here is this little gap that we've got on the top of the ring. We want to make sure that that is equal on both sides. Also nowadays, these scopes are so extremely sensitive that if you don't adhere to the torque settings, your crosshairs might actually move inside the scope if it's tightened too hard. So all we want to do is we just want to go and make sure that we've got equal tightness on either side. Now at the moment you'll see that there's still a lot of movement taking place here, and that's why I haven't taken off the level or the Boresight Pro. So as soon as I start talking, I want to make sure that this is still perfectly level. So let's just make our adjustment again. So there you can see perfectly level. That then brings us back to the grid, which is still perfectly level. Now we can start torquing the scope rings. So I'm just going to do exactly that. And you want to make sure as you make these adjustments that it doesn't move, it doesn't change. And there we go. Now we know that our scope is perfectly level. There is no doubt in our mind that our scope is level, and we can actually remove the level that we use in the front here. We can also remove the LevelRight Pro. So now we know that our scope is perfectly level. It's aligned with our rifle that is perfectly level. Now the problem that we have at this point in time is when we go to the range with these settings, we still don't know if our crosshairs are actually aligned. And that's where these missed shots come from. And in order to avoid that, that is where I'm going to use this traditional old boresighter. I've also got a laser boresighter that we use when we go to the range because you typically need about 25 meters in order to use that correctly. One of the things that many people do wrong is they take a laser boresighter into the basement, sort of project it 10 meters further, and then they still wonder why they miss. You want to try and avoid that. So for inside, I prefer still using this traditional boresighter. What is important here is you want to carefully insert the boresighter into the rifle barrel. You don't want to disturb or scratch the crown or the barrel for that matter. Okay, perfect. So now what we want to do is we want to adjust the boresighter with the rifle sight that we know is perfectly level. Okay, which is what I can see at this point in time. It's a little further adjustment. There we go. So now our crosshairs will align with the grid that we've got on the boresighter. So I wonder if I can show you what that looks like. Let me just use my good old GoPro again, and we'll try and get in here and see if you can see that grid. Okay, I don't know if you can or not. We'll have a look at that just now. But in essence, what we're trying to do is we're now trying to align our crosshairs with the grid. So I can see that this is slightly out, so I'm just going to move it a little bit to the left. Obviously, these caps spool out in order to adjust. Okay, that is now perfectly straight. So this should get us within like 15 millimeters or 1.5 centimeters at 100 meters. So this is as close as we're going to get on paper before we actually go out to the range. But we've just happened to save ourselves a lot of money, and we've eliminated a lot of variables in terms of what might go wrong. The last thing that I typically like to do is, now that I know that my scope is level and my rifle is level, I actually attach one of these to my scope, because that way I ensure consistency. Sometimes, and I don't know if you shoot a lot, you'll feel this as well, sometimes it feels like the rifle isn't perfectly level when in actual fact it is. So this ensures consistency because everything else is now set correctly. If I attach this to the scope itself, I can ensure that I am level every single time I take a shot. A couple of other things that I want to finish off with is the fact that obviously here we use a Picatinny rail, and our scope's rings have this groove or this nudge in the scope ring itself. We want to make sure that that actually fits into one of the grooves on our Picatinny rail. We don't want to mount it on the rail and then it moves and it slides into that groove. We want to make sure that it's correctly configured within the groove itself. Now sometimes, and I'm one of these individuals that's done this, is I've gone and bought myself a very expensive pair of scope rings, but they are Picatinny specifically. And then I went and bought a rifle that's got a dovetail connection on the rifle itself. And that's why I like this UTG, just a little, I mean, this thing is like 200 Rand. It's like 15 bucks, where I can take this and just slot this into the rail, the Picatinny rail, which now perfectly mounts on this device. And all I have to do is, if I tighten this, this will now tighten onto the dovetail. So that's absolutely an easy way to ensure that I can reuse my Picatinny rails or my expensive Picatinny rails on a dovetail device. Obviously, if you've got a Springer type of air rifle, this is not a great idea. There's a lot of movement in a Springer air rifle, so this won't work. But for any other rifle, this is a perfect alternative if you've invested in Picatinny scope rails and you then want to swap those over into a dovetail. And now we are confident to take this to the range. Thank you so much for watching.